What's going on, everybody? Michael Monica here, back with another video um, on a possibly significant severe weather event for next Wednesday. What was it be January 18th? So we've had quite an active winter time so far this year, and into from December into this year, starting with very very cold temperatures. As far as here like in Arkansas and Oklahoma and stuff, and near the negatives, 2 degrees, 0 degrees. Me personally, I got down to 2 degrees here in Arkansas, so that was pretty crazy. Then we turn right back around with a severe weather event there, and then another one after that, another one after that, and now right now, the southeast is getting one with quite significant tornadoes right now. It's pretty bad over there, especially Selma, Alabama, getting hit pretty bad, with a pretty bona fide tornado. So that system actually impacted us here in Arkansas as well, here in the Southern Plains, most primarily Arkansas, far east Oklahoma, but primarily Arkansas, into Missouri and Illinois with some supercells and Boeing segments there. So that's the system now departing. We can look at it at the mid levels as well. Small little shortwave, um, shortwave trough there, moving off to the northeast now. So our attention then turns to what happens next after this. If we go on through the forecast, I'm going to go through each model so far, and I'll talk about what I think is what should be occurring, what I see is occurring, and my overall thinking. So what I'll do with this is take us out using the GFS. Give me 1 second here. The GFS, and you'll see we will temporarily, after we get past this system on the 13th, this system actually begins to deepen and goes off the mid-Atlantic states into the Atlantic, and we get a brief period of ridging here. But the pattern is going to be progressive for the most part, so which would be important for setting up this potential severe weather event next week. So this is on the 15th, about 9 p.m., and we will continue to drag this out, and you can see the pattern becomes really zonal, west to east flow, with the ridging beginning to kind of just sit on the eastern United States. See, as you can see by your jet bending northward here. And let me actually turn off soundings. That's way out there. That was an accident. And so attention then turns to, by Monday, attention turns to, I mean, a small little system. You see these little kinks in the thickness lines here. This is a little system here. This is probably a lot weaker than what the guidance was suggesting at first, which is, going to be important as well, and I'll explain all that as to why it is. Maybe a brief little ridging right here as your thickness lines kind of kick upwards as well. So a little bit of ridge or trough ridge occurring right here. But your big system is here, and this will continue to dig to the southeast and eventually set up over the Four Corners area. As you can see, we begin to get more amplified with the jet stream, with even a forecast 110 knots over Baja California, about to lift straight over elevated mix layer over the desert in over the Mexico Plateau in northern Mexico. This would be 6 p.m. on the 17th. Let's keep dragging this out, and our target day is the 18th. So as you can see, that system begins to really eject and really get quite powerful over the central United States, with a 113 and 114 knot mid-level jet being mirrored on the actually quite a broad stretch. I like to call this the red jet stream, and the yellow I love to call it Laffy Taffy jet, because you have like strawberry or cherry flavoring and what would this be? Maybe lemon flavoring there. Or even banana flavoring. I love to call these like banana jet streams. So with that being said, you have, this actually kind of reminds me of the January 2nd system a bit, where you had your system kind of your low pressure, and we'll go to hour 150. You had your mid-level low pressure and your surface low pressure generally over the same place, which this would mean that you have a vertically stacked storm system. Now, typically, what I want to see is I typically want to see a more tilted system, which means your low pressure, your surface levels may be out here, and your mid level systems over here, and that would give you tilting in the atmosphere. But this still works, and it would actually probably give you a cold core setup over here in Kansas as well, with a quite potent surface low. But this really reminds me of January 2nd, given the fact that you had the same kind of forecast being depicted by the GFS, and then your same discrepancies with the other models. But anyway, we'll go back to the 500 real quick, and your system really ejects here. And again, quite a pretty powerful system. Long stretch of at least 80 knot mid-level winds, strengthening to 110 plus knots on the eastern side. And then of course, your impacts would be felt over here in Arkansas and possibly Mississippi. From Arklatex. So we'll look at. The only thing about January 2nd is that you had a lot more meridional flow with that, and this is more southwesterly as well. But what we'll do is we'll go to the bulk shear, and you'll see something here. So you'll see with your initiating boundaries, any initiating boundaries that set up, more north to south ahead of the main system, south to north, I should say. Imagine you got a south to north line here. Your mid-level winds or your driving wind is going to be off to the northeast or even the east northeast the further east you go. So you have some perpendicular wind vector setting up there. And this is especially true on other guidance as well, because the GFS could be a bit too progressive with this. Because that's a pretty known bias of the GFS to do. It could be pretty progressive with the system itself, which, yeah, this is a pretty large and potent system that we've got here. So it could be a bit too progressive, and that would give you even more directional shear over the target area, which as of now is more, I'll just say the mid-south. And so we can go up to 200 millibars, and it's just, man, this is a really strong system. 124, 126, 130 knot winds west-southwesterly over the area. Over the mid-south. This is just a pretty potent system. So if it's got moisture with it, we've really got to watch it. And per the GFS, it does. Now, there's a known bias at this range to have lower moisture, especially in the cold season, that was forecast. Now, I'll go back to the system ahead of this one real quick. My concern that I've got with the first system on the 16th is that it tries to... Well, really, it's not so much as that one, as it actually is today's system. The 12th to the 13th system, when it deepens, takes moisture down to the Caribbean. So the 16th system doesn't actually hurt your moisture return. It actually helps it return. I'm just concerned that there might be a bit of downplaying of moisture in the Gulf of Mexico, Central and West Gulf of Mexico. Maybe not so much the eastern, because of the fact that your forecast flow is offshore, and then that source region for this eastern Gulf of Mexico is this right here. As you can see, the air turns back around and wraps it back in. But we'll see just how well the Gulf can modify itself with this time that it's got to return itself. And as you can see, there's that Pacific cold front / dryline feature here. If this is more of a dryline, really bulging dryline, I'm going to confirm that or not, because your main cold front would be back here in the mountain still. You can see your moisture really surges out ahead of that system, and your 70 dews return here. And again, this could be underplayed just a bit. We'll see how this goes, but this amount of moisture could work with that strong of a system, in and of itself. So we'll just have to see. But quite a decently sized warm sector here with ridging returning to the southwestern Atlantic to help fuel that return flow. And so that's pretty much the GFS, and we can even go through the precipitation type just for the funs of it. So there's your 16th system. It's pretty good strength. It's just probably won't have much moisture to work with. It'll be like the primer to getting Gulf moisture to return back up. And then you have you have constant lee side cyclogenesis happening on the lee side of the Rockies, because you can see that here with the constant low pressures. And then it really begins to wrap up and take off once that storm system really begins to move over the Rockies and into the Great Plains. And as you can see, this could, even with that amount of moisture, you still have you even have some prefrontal storms with some even more scattered around convection on the Pacific frontless dry line itself. So not exactly a linear mode. Like it looks linear in nature, but this kind of look would give you more supercells along a boundary type of situation. Now this is really specific for 150, 153 hours out, but it does make sense given your wind profiles. I will say that it does make sense given your wind profiles. And we can even look at a sounding here. Just dig into it just a little bit. 18Z, we'll click in Arkansas since that's where it's really kind of trying to set up at the moment. And as you can see, your sounding looks kind of disgusting because it thinks there's no instability, which is another bias of the GFS. So, I mean, as far as your wind profiles go, which is what we'll focus on, pretty good. You got surface backing, veering up to the southwest or even west southwesterly flow, increasing with height. So your directional shear and your speed shear is great. Indicative your sounding is indicative of classic supercell. And of course, we're digging into it a bit too much because the GFS with its known biases is not too smart to click on soundings. But we'll just just to look at the wind profiles as to why this type of event would make sense. So that's pretty much your the GFS on this system, and we'll look at the other guidance here in a second. It's a pretty impressive system coming in as well, and I do believe your lapse rates are also probably underdone because of how your system is moving and ejecting, as well as scraping that fresh elevated mix layer off of northern Mexico and bringing it over. So I mean, but these are details that will be worked out in the long term, and I think they're actually already being worked on as far as the moisture, and I'll show that with the GFS ensemble. So we'll move over to I guess I'll do other operationals first. The GDPS, which is the CMC, and we'll go through with that. Go to the forecast loop. I've already got bulk shear enabled. 500 millibar, we'll look at this. A bit different evolution of the GFS, which to be expected, we're 150 hours out. You've got some discrepancies, but the same idea. Deepening system. This is what kind of scours at your Gulf for the time being, with a ridge and the pretty progressive pattern to begin with. There's your 16th system. Not too much depth to it, just enough there to exist. Zonal flow underneath it would be a primer to get moisture coming back up out of the Gulf. And the Gulf is getting time to rejuvenate itself as well. And then here's your system here. As you can tell, definitely not as potent as the GFS was suggesting, but it almost wouldn't matter given the fact that here it is when it ejects, looking just as impressive. And you can even see your perpendicular wind vectors using just a 500 millibar. In this case, with the GFS, you kind of couldn't do that, but with the CMC, you can. So same kind of Laffy Taffy, trough ejection, jet stream here, with wind vectors out ahead of the main system, more perpendicular to any initiating boundaries. And so we can go to our 150 with this one as well, and we can look at your not surface-based cape. Well, we can look at your lapse rates real quick. See how your lapse rates are so much healthier. This is what I would believe a lot more. Lapse rates being much healthier, but that would be with a system in the same place as the GFS. So you can see the discrepancies between one model that has a known bias of underplaying thermos and one model that typically isn't always super high on thermos, but it's doing a lot better with the change in temperature with height. And then it's also got, warm sector coming up in Arkansas, out of the Gulf. It's got deeper moisture in the Gulf of Mexico, so something we've really got to watch for. It's got more, 60 dews in the Gulf of Mexico. How deep is this moisture is suggesting? Just an average. Okay, so up to about 850, and then I guess this little skew here would be due to the eastern Gulf of Mexico being a bit drier aloft. That's an area average sounding. So if we click in the western Gulf, which is where a lot of the source region would be, actually about the same situation. So moisture's not overly deep, and this is your EML really kicking in here, out ahead of that system. But as you get more time, as we get, more time advancement toward this system, you will probably see moisture changes. It's probably going to trend deeper with moisture, just given how the system strength is, and we will. I'll have another video to confirm whether that's happening or not. So we'll look at your shear vector parallels real quick, or your shear boundaries real quick. And again, yeah, any initiating boundaries at 18Z and 18Z and 0Z. You can see a little storm there. Yeah, definitely more perpendicular to any initiating boundaries. That's an obvious given. So one thing I am noticing across a lot of guidance is that unlike January 2nd, we'll need to see if we have the moisture here. That's the biggest question. Do we have the moisture, which we will watch in the coming days, and how deep is that moisture? How good is the quality of that moisture? But also, unlike January 2nd, a lot more indications, depending on how this trough ejects, of more perpendicular shear vectors than the parallel shear vectors that the January 2nd had, which is why Storm struggled that day. But this day would be more favoring of supercells, just given the wind profiles from surface of 500 millibars. Won't go into too much of this, but yeah, here's your trough difference right here. You can tell it doesn't eject as fast at all, which I would tend to believe this could be more of the case, given the GFS does tend to have a progressive bias. So we'll just see how that trends in the coming days. And then with the Eucomet, again, large system. It only goes out to hour 144, so it's not as useful as this range, but still, we get out to Wednesday morning. Quite a, pretty big system here. And we go to our lapse rates. Pretty steep lapse rates being ejected in. I mean, it's almost 9.0 over Central Texas that morning, being ejected northeastward. So you can see how the GFS is definitely seems to be underplaying thermals at this point, but that's to be expected. It tends to do that. Like with other guidance is guilty of this too in the cool season. It's not just one model guilty of it. We'll look at your 500 millibar jet. Pretty impressive jet. Pretty massive swath of wind here. So again, this would be a pretty significant event should you get the moisture in place. And the CMC, or the Eucomet, definitely has that getting into place. Again, a bit more moist in the eastern Gulf of Mexico with southeasterly surface winds. So we will have to watch the southeasterly surface winds to make sure that we're not getting drier air advected in from the source as opposed to the deeper air. But again, that'll be something to watch in the coming days. We'll just click on the sounding here just for fun. Moisture on the Eucomet is definitely deeper, obviously deeper up into 850. And then your EML kind of kicks in here, which is pretty classic. So this has the early makings of a pretty decent severe weather event should this all come together properly. And then we're going to look at the Euro here. Now, the Euro probably has the most unfavorable look as far as warm front advancement, but it still has a pretty bona fide system here. So all models have it. It's here, 500 millibar winds, really is west-southwesterly. So with the current idea that we're getting from this, I believe it would probably be a bit slower, even though the ridge isn't as stacked over here as you'd like to see with a slower pattern. I would tend to believe it would be a tad bit slower than the GFS, so just a tad bit. We'll see how that evolves. And so there's your system that we just saw in 500 millibars. Pretty impressive system. Again, coming from the four corners. Warm front by 6 a.m. is already in the state by this point. A lot of guidance is already agreeing on that. Now, the one thing here you have is northeasterly winds on a warm front. So what this would typically tend to do is hold your warm front down more effectively. But again, this is weaker northeast winds, not with your high pressure is all the way in Canada. From so I'm not too keen on, well, really this picture, because we didn't really see this picture, but it makes sense to have easterly winds along a warm front. But as far as these weak northeasterly winds or almost easterly winds holding this warm front down with such a potent system out west, really kind of having trouble believing that. But the Euro has had a more difficult time resolving the idea in the middle range, middle to long range. But during the close range, it's really done really well as of late. So just kind of showing again, there's a system. The system is quite potent here, quite potent, and it's on every piece of guidance. So you kind of know it's coming at this point. We haven't even gotten ensembles yet. And I did say that I wanted to go check out the GFS real quick to see if that was more of a dryline or a Pacific Front. But anyway, here's your. We'll check out the lapse rates real quick. Again, steeper lapse rates being convected into the area. You know, a bit more tame than the Eucomet because the Eucomet tends to be the most aggressive when it comes to that stuff. But quite decent EML plume here, though, as to be expected coming off of the Mexican plateau. So that would give you a good EML, good temperature change with height. So that's something to watch as well. In your bulk shear, we'll go out a little bit further. Now the Euro, you have to look a bit more south because the Euro, again, remember the Euro was more southerly down here due to the fact that it had shunted warm air or warm front advancement. So shear vectors are compared to any initiating boundaries that would might try to set up south to north or even over here, southwest to northeast with the main flow. Still, you have these wind barbs kind of pointing away from any initiating boundaries, which would give you a that would give you more of a perpendicular look. So again, still a supercell type of environment with probably a squall line on the front. That's what this kind of looks like to me. Just from experience perspective, this looks more like a supercell in the open warm sector if you can get one, and a line or broken line of storms, potentially supercells on the main front as well. So we'll go back to the GFS really quick, and we'll see what temperatures do. This is how you can identify a dry line or a cold front or a Pacific front. Which a Pacific front can act like a dry line as well, so that's not to be mistaken. So temperatures, you can see where your convection is. Temperatures don't exactly spike behind this thing, which would tend to make me believe it's more of a Pacific cold front, but then again, they don't really drop either. So it could be more of a Pacific cold front / dry line. You could call it a Pacific cold front, but it could have the same effects as a dry line. So now we'll go over to this is the model comparison I had really, so we can just visualize in one frame what the different models had. Well, we can only go to hour 144, so we can include the Eucomet. So here's a GFS with the most potent system, Eucomet. You can see your cold air lobe on the Eucomet is actually further to the southwest, and that small change could have an implication as well. Then the CMC, smaller but still potent. In that, you know, the coldest air is on the southern end. You know, basically what you're seeing here with these little subtle differences is how your trough looks when it ejects and exactly what it does. And so there's your Euro with another lobe kind of behind it. That's the only model I'm seeing to really show that. But your main system over here. So as you can see, the GFS is the furthest north with the system. Eucomet is kind of like that as well, as far as your thickness lines go, but it's also a bit further to the southwest, as you can see, with it punching back to the southwest, with the core of the system punching back to, or core of the coldest air, I should say, punching back to the southwest. Then you have the Eucomet or the CMC, which is a little bit faster, but smaller, so it's still slower in a way. Then you have the Euro, which is over here in the, I like to call this a kind of like three-state region with New Mexico, Oklahoma, Panhandle, Texas Panhandle. I like three-state area. So you can see on every piece of guidance it's there. So a system is coming. You also have differences in your ridge strength as well. Well, again, we'll get to all that in due time. So now here's your GFS, GEFS. This is your GEFS or GFS ensemble, and right now I have the median moisture. And so here is the run, because we're gonna look at the moisture real quick. So here's the run from the 9th 18Z all the way to today's 12Z run, and we're gonna loop it and just watch the moisture in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is for the exact same, valid for the same time, 6 a.m. And we'll watch how this changes from older runs to newer runs, same time frame. You notice something? Notice how you now have deeper moisture being depicted in the Gulf of Mexico. 70s even being depicted from some of the ensembles, even as far east as this area here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, despite being drier out here. And look at your moisture axis as it lifts further up into Arkansas in the Mid-South. Now again, this is the exact same hour, 6 a.m. But as we get closer, uh, moisture looks to be increasing with trends using the ensembles, and that tends to be a common feature, especially in the cold season when you get your system closer in time. So moisture trends are coming up, and we will see exactly how far north this gets and exactly how deep our moisture gets. So as you can see here, we'll look at the mid-level jet as well. Notice how we begin to get amplification of the jet. It gets stronger, and your system begins to form. The ensembles begin to agree. Hey, now there's a system out here. So your system is coming, and your model, your ensemble guidance is really growing the idea, and they're really starting to like it. And as they begin to increase the signal, your moisture signal begins to come up. And we already saw the warm front was already like into Arkansas in the Mid-South, as far as that was concerned. But it's still really good to look at ensembles as far as, like the idea of your system, which as you can see is definitely grown over the last few days, and see exactly where your moisture axis is, and does it match up with other OP runs like the GFS, the European, stuff like that. And so we'll even take a look at the mean sea level pressure members, and we'll look at how the idea of a stronger system, surface low, has come up as well. Definitely have the signal. And of course, there's going to be differences with where this exactly sets up, because you have while you have like the GFS, Euro, CMC, all these other types of data showing one thing. I mean, the same thing, but differences within more detailed stuff. Same thing happens with the ensemble. So the EPS has gotten out to where I wanted it to, which is lovely because it wasn't actually out far enough before. And as we can see, on the old run, we really didn't have the system at all. It was all the way out here in the southeast. Really, it was all the way out here. And as we look closer in time, look at how that signal has adjusted rapidly. Now you can see the difference here. Same time frame, 6 a.m. Wednesday, same time frame. But your system, as opposed to the GFS, your GFS was way up here, right? Now the EPS is way down here in New Mexico. So these differences have to be watched, and you even have an idea of a stronger ridge coming up here, which will help pump moisture up. Now we'll look at your 500 millibar winds. Look at that. You pretty much had a ridge here at first, and then your trough was all the way over here. And as you got closer in time, you really changed that idea. Went to southwesterly flow instead, and now your idea of a trough has come up. And so with really southwesterly flow, which is really good for storms. And we'll see what moisture does on this as well. We'll see how moisture has been acting on the EPS. Same idea. It's fluctuating a bit because it still has because like the Euro, it is having an idea, or having a concern of northeasterly winds and are kind of inhibiting the warm front. But we'll have to see how this goes. Because I mean, even like your main OP models, you can have your EP, your ensembles kind of thinking the same thing. They can kind of agree with each other and disagree. So that's the moisture trend. We'll look at the surface low members here. So as you can see the EPS isn't a lot more at odds with itself. It's not sure where the low pressure is going to set up. And as far as the GFS, you had a well-defined area of low pressure here, with a lot of the data agreeing on that. Euro, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the EPS and Euro having a bit of a harder time figuring out how the pattern is going to evolve in the middle range as of late. You can see here, look at your spread of your ensembles as far as your member centers go, your low pressure centers go. It's so widespread right now. The EPS has tried to depict a smaller area of low pressure, more concise area of low pressure here. But the EPS, the ensembles are everywhere. And this is probably a part of the reason your moisture is having an issue too. It's having an issue with your moisture too. It's like everything is interconnected. Everything's connected. This issue here could also be as a result of why your moisture is more uncertain as far as how north is going to get. You've had a trend of it coming up, but then you kind of had it halted because your ensembles are at odds. So we'll see how that trends. Because a lot of this is really just pointing out the potential is there and what way the trends are going, you know. So we're going to go to the CMC ensemble as well because what we just looked at was the Euro ensemble. And then we have the CMC ensemble. And we'll look at the 500 first. Again, 6 a.m. Wednesday, same time frame. And there you go, your more southwesterly flow getting established here with your system developing here. And you can see they aren't as actually as cut off as a GFS. That is because they are still uncertain as to where the system's going to be, so the ensemble mean wouldn't cut off a system when it doesn't know exactly where it's going to set up at. Or if it's going to be cut off at all. That's another added factor as well. So you can see it setting up here in New Mexico. Again, your EPS and your CMC setting up further south than the GEFS, which would indicate a slower progression of the system, slower ejection, but still an ejection through the day. And we'll look at your moisture trends here because I'm actually looking at this for the first time as well. Same idea, the exact same idea. And you can see it bounces more, but you have a straight trend of it being up, coming north, with deeper moisture in the Gulf of Mexico. You can definitely notice that. So a lot of this is going to be watching trends and seeing how things go, but there is obvious concern, especially as SPC has mentioned, there is the possibility of an outlook here in the coming days. This system needs to be watched. We'll look at the members real quick as well. You see the CMC ensemble trying to suggest low pressure here, with your members, not all of them, but a few of them, suggesting your low pressure sets up here in the newest run. So I'll go to this run right now, the newest run today. And you still have a member or two back here. So I mean, there's still timing differences as to be expected with the system like this time frame, with so much going on with the pattern right now. We still have to figure out exactly what's going to happen. With ridging, moisture. So there's still a lot of questions. Obviously, also a lot of questions, but we have enough answers to be able to determine that there is going to be a severe weather setup at least somewhere in the mid-south, with a trough coming in out west and moisture at least making an attempt to return out of the Gulf of Mexico. And as far as the specifics, how deep is it? How, what's the quality of that moisture? How far did your system come? What's the flow exactly going to be like? Those are all questions we got to answer later down the road. But the main point of this video was to depict you've got severe weather potential in the mid-south around the middle of next week. And it does need to be watched closely because with the strength of this trough, if your moisture is quality enough, you could be setting up for a rather significant event. So it needs to be watched definitely very carefully. And I know I'm maybe sounding a little bit out there using the word significant at this range, but it truthfully does need to be watched. Your wind shear is there, your system is there, your lapse rate should be there. As far as your temperature change with height, support storm should be there. All you're really looking for is how deep is your moisture? Where's your moisture setting up at? Where's everything setting up at? So we will continue to definitely see how that evolves and watch how this goes, because should this continue to look like a more significant event, there will definitely be video updates. Well, there'll be video updates no matter what, whether it looks like it's going away or coming up. But for now, that is all I will share, and that's all I can really share, as we've gone through a lot of stuff that isn't too entirely specific, really just to drive home, hey, there's a threat here. There's at least potential here, and possibly a threat here in the Mid-South, middle of next week. So that's all for now in this video, and thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.